going then. Good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to welcome you to Sweden and this remote session that we have for the rest of the POLIS Conference. This morning, we're going to be talking about planning for automated vehicles. My name is Anna Clark. I work at EIT Urban Mobility. I've been at the new organization. I've been there since August. Before that, I worked as a consultant in Sweden. And before that, I worked at POLIS, and I used to share an office with Suzanne, who is the organizer of this session. So it's great, as always, to be at the POLIS conference, even though this time we don't get to meet in person. So I'll just do a quick introduction. First of all, a run through of some housekeeping rules. It's day 4 of the conference, so those of you who've been paying attention will already know all of this, but I'll just remind you, if you want to ask questions, so it's only the speakers and the moderator who will have their camera and their audio on, and if you have any questions, and I hope you do have lots of questions, then please put them into the chat. So you go to the chat function on the right-hand side and then click on session, and then you ask your questions there. And I see that many people are already saying good morning and welcome there. So you're getting the hang of it. We won't have any polls, so I won't talk about that. If you want to see who else is attending this particular session, you click on the right-hand side and you click on people and then on session, and you'll see all of the people who are in the session. If you want to maximize the screen and hide the chat, you can either press on the button right at the top on the right-hand side to hide the chat, or you can double-click on the presentation or the speaker. We'd also like you to please try out the networking function and visit the exhibition area if you haven't already done so. You can do that. We have a break in the middle of our session, which I'll explain in a minute, and also after the session during the lunch break. So I will go on now and tell you basically just the names of the speakers and what we're planning to do today. We have 5 speakers, Richard van der Wulp from the city of Rotterdam, Sergio Fernández Balaguer from EMT in Madrid, Richard Laing from Rupprecht University, Wolfgang Backhaus from Rupprecht Consult, Apostolos Ziakopoulos from National Transport University of Athens. And I will let them all introduce themselves when they have their presentations. When we have in this session, the plan is as follows. You may have noticed in the program that this session goes on till 12:15 and we have a break in the middle. The idea that we have is that we will have 5 shorter presentations with a short question and answer in the session now from 9:30 till 10:45. So there'll be 10, well, I'll be very strict with the speakers. I've told them I'll be very strict. They will have 10 minutes to talk and then we'll have some questions. So again, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and then I will ask the questions to the speakers. 10:45 to 11:15, that's your chance to do your online networking, grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee and do whatever you need to do in that half an hour. We'll have a short break. Then from 11:15 to 12:15, we're going to have a very exciting panel discussion with the speakers. And we'll be discussing some interesting aspects that have been brought up in their presentations and of interest in this topic of planning for automated vehicles. So that's it. One part of the session with presentations, a break, and then our panel session at the end with all of the speakers. And we'll finish at 12:15, the whole session. So without further ado, I would like to present the first speaker, which is Richard van der Wulp from Rotterdam. You can introduce yourself and I will disappear now so you can have your 10 minutes and we'll see. So there you go. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Thank you for POLIS to give this opportunity for me to present. I will share my screen. I think Anna has to stop sharing or not. Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, so I'm Richard van der Wulp from the city of Rotterdam, Senior Smart Mobility. And together with Lisbeth van Silfhout and Niels Wiersma, we have done a study about spatial impact of the automation of vehicles in the city. What can we expect and how should we act on it? Well, you get the scoop because this is the first time we present it. Even my own colleagues didn't see it yet because it's not really finished yet. The last hands is put on the final report. So enjoy, and I hope I can answer your questions afterwards. Yes. I hope that, yeah, this is going correct. First, I will show you the agenda. I will go shortly into the 3 cities. I said 1.5 minutes because, as you said, Anas wants me to do it in 10 minutes. Then a little bit about techniques, but I hope a lot of you know already about the techniques of CCAM. And then more into the spatial impact on the cities. And as I promised, 3 measures you can do now. I've chosen 3 because there are many more, but you will see that shortly. Well, Utrecht, Rotterdam, and Eindhoven, 3 big cities in the Netherlands, about 2 million inhabitants altogether. And we looked at all those cities specifically about ownership of cars, public access to public transport. So you can see that in the port of Rotterdam, that's less than in the city center, obviously. A distance you can travel, and so on and so on. We looked at all the aspects of those cities. And then we looked at these 3 items. This is our approach on the report. The spatial aspect, the technique aspect. I will start with the technique aspect, and eventually the policy aspect about what are the consequences for policy? What can we do? Use this development. The technique, as I promised, I will not go into detail. I hope this is familiar for everyone. On the right side, you see all those levels and what can we expect, and that's one of the questions. When can we expect certain techniques to develop, and when should we do something as a city government? What is our role? That's quite difficult to answer, but we tried. So we made a list of all kind of techniques. It's in detail. You cannot read this. It's even in Dutch, so don't bother. But we selected all those techniques and find out in which amount of years it will probably be visible in the city starting to develop, and what will be the impact on which kind of policy goal. So we looked at all of them, and then it's kind of interesting that of course you have some lane detection, self-driving subways, some cruise control we see now already developing in the coming years, but in the next 5 to 10 years we can probably expect something in the way of automatic parking on distance, delivery robots, self-driving buses, trams, and boats. And I'm not sure when this exactly will happen and how it will happen, but it will. Some of them will happen and will have an impact on the city. So we have to deal with that. Then the second part, which is the most important part of our report, is the spatial impact on the city, and what can we expect, when and how will it happen? I cannot go into detail in all the measures and all the impacts because there are too many. I didn't get 2 hours to explain everything, so I will do it in a few minutes. So I only go into detail in some of them. Everything we did about the impacts and the consequences, we looked at these kind of policy goals and these types of suburbs, because it will differ per kind of suburb also, and also of course for the logistic and industrial area. And as I said, there are so many chances, opportunities, and so many risks, and I will explain a few of them shortly on the basis of those policy goals, also about suburban areas, and then in the end, as I promised, I will zoom in 3 main categories. Some nice pictures I will explain. Left, you can see road capacity. So yeah, they will drive more close together. There will be another use of streets. And then on the right side, upper right side, you can see accessibility. So more drop-off, less parking. Yeah, changes with the last mile challenge. How can we answer that? This is not only about CCM. All those things we have looked at is about what what's the relation with CCM? Because not everything is one-on-one with CSM, but maybe it needs CCM, or maybe it helps when its CCM is developing. Then road safety, of course, we can look at different road design, different speeds, of course, the interaction between vehicles, but also we have to work towards interaction with those pedestrians and those cycling, and sustainability. Of course, almost all of them I think are electric, so less exhaust. But yeah, of course, there's the discussion of the usage, because in Netherlands they have a very nice report by the province of North Holland about probable scenarios, and in all those scenarios we can expect probably more driving miles, driving kilometers than with cars than we have now. So yeah, we have to work on that. Then a few others. Livability, of course, if you change the area, you can try new things. I will go into that afterwards. All kind of possibilities about densification in or out of the city. That's not very clear yet, but it's difficult. And of course, inclusion, which is, for me in Rotterdam, a very important subject, but very difficult for our department as a mobility department to handle. And the CCM, the automation, if done right, if can helpful be more accessibility to specific kind of public transport, cheaper transport. So it's important to relate this and think about these things. Now, just to show off, we've done this also as per goal and per quarter, but I cannot. It's not too much time. Therefore, not only the opportunities, but all the risks. What can you expect? Too much detail for now. We did this in more detail for every quarter. Nice pictures also to explain for every professional, not only that is expert on this field, but to explain what's happening. Also specific for Rotterdam, Utrecht, and Eindhoven, all those three cities. And then finally, the three measures you can do now. We've incorporated the conclusions to three main aspects. One, flexible design of your infrastructure. A lot of things can change if, due to CCA measures, we can see more sharing or not, we can see more parking on a distance or not, and therefore we can maybe see a change of usage of the place in the suburbs, in the quarters. So less parking, more drop-off, different kind of speeds, and so on. And this will not happen tomorrow, maybe in 10 years, maybe even longer, but this infrastructure we have laid down is for longer than that, maybe it's decades. So we have to think now about what could that be already, and how could we be flexible in the design, because we don't know exactly what will happen. Secondly, a reserve space. A lot of positive people said, well, less parking, nicer streets, but not all those cars will go away. We still have cars. Maybe it's more in an optimal situation. It's all sharing and all remote parking. But then again, sometimes you have to park them. And I've done a lot of work on park and ride in the past, and it's very difficult to find your place because we have a dense city, dense region, and these things cost a lot of space. So think about now already where you need that space in your quarter for hubs, for parking in your region, and so on. So again, for calculating for the future. And lastly, geofencing. It can be done nowadays. If A and B is met, that means C. So in a geographical area, certain things are limited. This can be temporary constrictions, school times, around the nature, about congestion pricing, number of users per car, and it can limit the speed, it can limit the dimension of vehicles, or kind of fuel, and so on and so on. So there, yeah, unlimited almost possibilities for policy and how to deal with that. And not everything is possible yet, but we have to trial these things and work together with manufacturers, because this can have a big impact, and it's something you should really should do as a city government. And that's my presentation. Anna, up to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Excellent timekeeping, I'd like to say. A really interesting presentation, bringing up some things that I think we're definitely going to discuss those some more in the panel discussion later. There's a couple of questions that have come up now in the chat, so I'll read those out to you. From Matthias, I don't dare pronounce your surname. How does automation such as Uber private transport, mass transit, and robo-taxis relate to the opportunities of automation for more inclusive and affordable mobility?
Yes, if I'm correct, Uber is mostly for one person, and not like a bus or so for many different people, and that's one of the big risks for the future of cities. I think in those scenarios I called earlier in the research earlier done in the Netherlands, we've seen that that this will take a flight, and if done badly, I think a lot of extra, they think even twice as many kilometers will be driven in the city, and this is not the future for a livable city, I think.
Yeah, so this issue of having more vehicle kilometers is really, can be really problematic if it's not sorted out. So you have to think of all of these use cases that you presented sort of as some of these can lead to increased vehicle kilometers, and you have to identify where that can be and where you can go in and make the difference. So taxis, Uber, that can be one of the things that you can look at in that case. Another question here from Christina, just a clarification. She didn't understand, is this a study or have you made some pilot tests already?
What we did, this is a study, not a pilot test. We've done some things. We have, like, for 20 years now, we have automated bus on our own lane, and we've done a lot of things in the port, which also are already done for 20 years. But this is more looking at the development of all the automation of vehicles, public transport, and own cars, and so on, in the city center for the coming decades.
Yeah, I'm really interested. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Another question: do you see automated vehicles as a positive development for mobility policy from a point of view, or is it potentially negative development with regards to cycling, walking, public transport, etc.?
Yeah, difficult question. I think it's something what will happen, and I'm scared that it will have more negative effects, more risks than opportunities. There are opportunities. In the earlier question, I did not really address the inclusiveness. Of course, we can help certain groups which we cannot really help nowadays. So there are positive effects, but yeah, I think we as a government, we have to work really hard and really together with the industry to make it as positive as possible. But I think I'm coordinator of smart mobility, and we work also on sharing and all those other kinds of developments of mobility, I think there are more positive elements in those kind of developments than in this one.
Very interesting. We're going to take that up in the panel discussion now. We'll close there for questions because we have to move on to the next speaker. Thank you very much, Richard, and we'll hear from you again. So I'd like to welcome the next speaker, who is Sergio from Madrid. Welcome to the floor. Here you are. And I'll let you introduce yourself and share your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. Thank you to POLIS for this opportunity. My name is Sergio Fernández Balaguer. I work for EMT Madrid, is the public transport operator of the city. And I'm heading the International Cooperation Projects Department. So in the next minutes, I will show you the roadmap towards automation of EMT buses. Actually, it will be more which are our experiences with these first automation initiatives in Madrid. So increased connectivity, automation are principal trends that can potentially have a big impact on how users, all of us, businesses and society will perceive and experience mobility in the future. There are many benefits expected from this, from the increased use of connectivity and automation technologies in all modes of transport, both at individual and at the social level, and they are instrumental for the cross-modal integration of transport. Increasing safety is most of the times the main driver of deploying connected and automated transport. And at EMT, we are aware of the benefits this could bring. As the main public transport operator in Spain, EMT Madrid is highly interested. We are highly interested in the potential that automation brings into market and bus operations specifically. And we are closely following up all the European strategic approaches. And from our own point of view, although full automation in public road and real traffic scenarios may seem like a long-term target, and there are still many uncertainties, for instance, communication side of it, the 5G networks and Internet of Things have still a way ahead. In controlled environments, such as our own bus depots, our own operation centers, the possibilities have much less uncertainty, and they can help us to increase considerably the performance of our daily operations and reducing downtime and non-productive hours in internal tasks, which are not directly related or linked to the public service we provide. And this approach is being explored also by some other public transport operators in Europe too. So for these reasons is why at EMT we are currently working and participating in these two relevant projects you can see on the screen to explore and research in automation potential for a bus service. The first one on the left is a European funded project with a focus on real traffic conditions in order to provide a service oriented to public. And the one on the right hand side, Autobus, or Autobus in English, is a Spanish funded project with a focus on semi-controlled environments and with the aim of improving our own operations. So the commitment, our commitment as a public transport operator includes sharing the experience in carrying out real public transport operations, deploying different typologies of vehicles on the road, adapting existing ones. So we will not purchase automated vehicles from different providers. We will adapt our own vehicles. We will deploy a commercial service with real users, and we will test this complex scenario and seamless autonomous transport chains, as well as platooning and autonomous docking and parking. So the first one it's quite an ambitious European project coordinated by UATP. You can see many partners from all over Europe, plus organizations from all across the globe. So far is the most comprehensive autonomous vehicles urban demonstration initiative in Europe. It has quite a big budget, 36 million euros, and the project aims to advance on the automation of transport in line with the priorities and the strategic lines established by the European Union, including transport on demand, mobility as a service, logistics as a service, and all through real pilots in different cities. This is a screenshot of all the partners involved. 69 different ones, and the different actions will take place in the so-called 5 mega sites. The French one, the German one, the Austrian one, the Swedish one, and the Spanish one in Madrid. In Madrid, we will have 2 locations in which EMT is a partner of this, is the main public partner of this Madrid mega site, and there will be also 20 different locations or 20 other different cities through Europe with the satellite and trackers sites. The project started last January the 1st. It will last for 4 years, and starting in 2022, January 2022, is when the real live urban demonstrations with these real service seamless operations will start, and they will have to last at least for 12 months. And more in particular, in the Madrid mega sites, we are 4 local partners, Spanish partners, and they are very well-known Spanish companies, Tecnalia, Irizar, and Indra. The aim of the project is to enable and provide this safe and sustainable integrated mobility for people through the deployment of a mixed fleet of 5 different vehicles. EMT will adapt our own microbuses, the Gulliver model, and the rest of the vehicles will be provided either by Irizar, the 12 meters long bus, and 2 Twizzys provided by Tecnalia. And then we have also Indra, which will be in charge of the communication side of it. So that means the installation of the roadside units, also the onboard unit in our bus, and Tecnalia is currently coordinating the Madrid mega site. Irizar is an OEM, it's a bus OEM, and they are already working in some other automation projects. And the vehicles will have to follow complex trajectories and difficult maneuvers, for instance, intersections, roundabouts, in different various conditions. And the aim is to reach as high as possible level of automation. But that is something we are still working on. More, if we talk about the locations, we have 2 different locations in Madrid. We have the open environment one, is where we will deploy this autonomous shuttle in real traffic conditions between La Nave. La Nave is the Madrid Innovation Hub. It's located in the outskirts of the city in Villaverde district, and will link with the Villaverde Bajo Cruce interchange station. This is a subway station with bus stops and other mobility services. And the idea is to provide this public service, public passenger transport service. And then we have the second location in a semi-controlled environment. It's at EMT Carabanchel Bus Depot for these self-guided operations to parking, washing, workshops, and refueling. And within this second scenario is where we will have also the platooning pilot together with the vehicles from Irizar and Tecnalia. So this is just a map on the locations. So they are both in the south part of the city, out of the first ring, but it is a quite dense area. Actually, it's a district and a neighborhood with a very compact urban characteristics. On the right-hand side, you have a picture of a Carabanchel Bus Depot. It's like a city itself with different typologies of vehicles working 24 hours, 7 days a week or year round. And it's like a city itself. On the downside, you have the innovation hub. So it's quite a complex ecosystem. This is a screenshot of the itinerary we have defined. Is a 1.6 kilometers long shuttle service connecting these 2 places. And some of the main challenges are related to the necessary cooperation with the city council, such as getting the permits and also with the traffic authority, the National Traffic Authority, the need for implementation of the communication infrastructure, and the road adaptation. That means maybe the need of some public works on infrastructure and management, signaling, etc. And this is an example on the study we have already carried out following the itinerary. So we have like kind of critical points, either crossings, etc. And this is just an example on the type of things we will find. So for instance, the need of synchronizing traffic lights to avoid difficult turns from the bus, and also blind spots, for instance, when having crossings. And the second project, Autobus, just to finalize, is runs alongside the national-based project and the Spanish Center for the Development of Industrial Technology, the CDTI, together with the support of the Center for Automation and the University Institute of Automobile Research in SIA. And the idea is to work on this automation and teleoperation of our buses within the bus depots. And the idea is to improve the efficiency, to maximize the resources, and to reduce the non-productive personnel hours. It will last for 24 months, and it has been integrated as one of the use cases of SHOW, but it is not financed and funded by SHOW project. It's funded by the Spanish ministry. So as a summary, autonomous vehicles and autonomous mobility is coming. It's set to revolutionize urban mobility, but there are still many uncertainties. So the successful integration, it requires to adapt policies accordingly. Also the aspect about infrastructure and communications, data sharing and governance, security, liability rules and insurance, scalability of service, all those topics must be addressed. The coexistence with non-automated vehicles as well. And from a public transport operator point of view, we are also concerned about the human resources side, either the impact on employment, we have 7,000 bus drivers, and also the skills for the maintenance of these vehicles. So by participating in these projects and sharing these practices, we hope that we will at least cooperate in answering these questions and enhancing Madrid public transport service, as well as positioning ourselves by researching and innovating. So that's all from my side. Thank you. And if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you very much. Very exciting projects you've got going there. And there aren't any questions as far as I see, but there are some congratulations in the chat about this is a very exciting project and it's a really good way to approach it. From my side, I can come with a question. You said at the beginning of your presentation that the main driver for you in using autonomous vehicles was in terms of safety, even though you measured other impacts as well that you can have. Is bus traffic identified as a case where there will be a big improvement in safety?
Well, actually, and this is linked to this kind of concern we have on the human resources aspect, is that whenever we talk about automation, it's kind of risky, at least from this public transport operator point of view. In these first stages, what we see in the biggest potential is when thinking about real traffic conditions and running an automated buses in real traffic conditions is the assistance in safety. We have 2,000 buses. They run all the day through the city, and there are many small accidents, little crashes, traffic lights, people that cross without paying attention, and also ourselves, our drivers may not pay attention enough. So we think a very good help in automation, maybe adapting buses or installing at our buses some automated functions that help in safety for safety purposes. That's the main on the real traffic conditions. And then in control environments are the other ones, helping us in improving efficiency and reducing these non-productive hours, because we really need a lot of people to move around all those buses when they arrive to the bus depots and when they need to go to the workshops, to the cleaning, to the refueling, and that may help as well.
Thank you. It's very interesting. As far as I see, there are no questions. I think I actually have lots of more questions for you, but we'll take it in the panel discussion later. And we will move on for now to our next speaker to make sure that we will keep to time. Thank you so much, Sergio. Very, very interesting presentation. And now we'll move on to Richard from Aberdeen. So welcome, and feel free to introduce yourself and share your presentation.
Hi, Anna. I'll attempt to share my presentation. Okay. Here we go. Okay, can you see my screen okay, Anna?
I can see your screen and we can hear and see you perfectly. So
great stuff. Okay, well, I'll just start then. Okay, my name is Richard Laing. I'm a professor at Robert Gordon University, which is in Aberdeen in Scotland. And I'm presenting this morning not just on behalf of myself and my colleague David Gray, but also on behalf of a consortium which we're working with on a project called PAV. What I was going to speak about for the next 10 minutes or so is a project where we're trying to deal with stakeholder engagement within the context of considering the challenge of integrating the application and the introduction of autonomous vehicles within urban planning. One of the projects we're involved with at the moment, and I did see in the list of people who are attending this morning, we're also involved in a project called Art Forum, which is funded by Interreg North Sea Region. The particular examples that I'm speaking about this morning come from a project which is another Interreg project, and I'll provide a link to that towards the end of the presentation. This has been a really nice project to work on so far. We've been going for about 1 year. It's been a really nice project because there is such a range of impressive partners involved in the project. I don't necessarily include myself in that, but we have a range of partners which include transport authorities, some very forward-thinking municipal and local authorities from across the North Sea region. And importantly, we also have the opportunity to work with a range of experts from universities and consultancies across Europe as well. So I would say, in comparison to some other projects that I've been involved with, where sometimes as the university or the academic partner you can feel slightly lonely, this is a project where we're genuinely seeing partners kind of learning from each other. I'm learning a huge amount from the municipal authority partners, and I think some of the approaches that we and the people in Ghent and the people in POLIS themselves are introducing to the project are actually quite innovative. So it's been pointed out by many projects now that many European cities have already started experimenting with autonomous vehicles. So I think we felt it was important within this project that we didn't necessarily just spend our time looking at demonstration projects to see if the vehicles will work. We were instead trying to look at particular use cases and particular challenges that were maybe being faced within the areas and regions that we were concerned with. So we've spent about, as I was saying, 1 year of the project establishing scenarios, establishing stakeholder groupings, and establishing approaches to stakeholder engagement. The plan had been to begin running some of these test studies during 2020, but that's not been possible for obvious reasons. So we're anticipating now that the pilot studies will take place probably in the first 3 quarters of 2021. And at that stage, we will then together, specifically with the University of Oslo, but I would say with all partners within the project, we will start looking very specifically at urban planning and urbanism issues that maybe emerge from some of the pilots that we're looking at. So I've given some examples here on the screen of reasons why people may feel that autonomous vehicles could be useful within their region. And I think this has been our starting point, and it's been really nice to see that we have tried to then work within each of the regions within the project to ensure that the pilot studies that we're headed towards are genuinely solving problems which might be more difficult to solve if we didn't have autonomous vehicles. And I'll explain what I mean by that just in a moment. So during the project then, like over the course of the next 3 years or so, we will produce spatial and urban planning strategies, urban design guides. The University of Ghent and POLIS are particularly working at studies looking at socio-economic impact. The involvement and the development of a community of stakeholders, though, is really, really crucial to this project, so that we can kind of understand how might it be possible to co-design the pilot studies. And I'll introduce those that I speak about at the bottom of this slide in a moment. But how can we maybe co-design those pilot studies, and how can we still use that same community of stakeholders to then appraise the extent to which those pilot studies have actually addressed the problem that we were looking at. We in RGU have also been doing some work up in Orkney, which is group of islands just off the north coast of Scotland, which is a municipal authority region in its own right. And we have been developing road mapping towards how within that kind of geographically enclosed region, it may in fact be possible to, excuse the pun, roll out autonomous vehicles, but roll them out in very particular use cases. So my colleague David has been looking specifically at social care, the use of the AV island, kind of thinking about the huge amount of renewable energy which is generated in that area and how we could connect that with electrically powered autonomous vehicles. And also looking at things like delivery and ferries. So this kind of ranges from very much people-centered towards infrastructural concerns. The 4 areas that we're looking at within PAV are, they have connections between them which have become more apparent over the first year of the project. So these are all stills taken from Hanover, where the intention there is to introduce a pilot study which is specifically looking to connect one of the university campuses with the city centre. And how that connects with existing mass transit is going to be very important. But one of the fascinating things for me is that we have almost a kind of captive stakeholder group, in the sense that that stakeholder group is where it's possible to identify who might use the vehicle, but it's also going to be important for us to maybe talk to people who maybe have businesses or live along the route, or other people who may want to use the vehicle, the university itself, as well as the municipal authority. Initially within Inverness, which is in the north of Scotland, it's the capital of the Highlands and Islands, we were initially going to be doing something similar, which was linking the University of the Highlands and Islands campus with the city centre. That's changed slightly, and we're still linking the campus, but we're linking it with an area which a large number of students and staff from the university habitually go to, but typically using pedestrian or cycle routes. So working with Hightrans, it became kind of clear that they were actually more interested in looking at that kind of a challenge, because they kind of feel that the pilot could turn into something that would be actually applied immediately post-project, which is a bit like the situation in Hanover region. Varberg in Sweden were initially looking to do a project which connected thematically with a couple of the things that the previous speaker spoke about, which were kind of technical challenges of navigating road junctions, and if you're in a busy part of the city, how do you avoid you know, causing accidents or knocking people down and so on. They've now migrated their pilot study, though, to a coastal area just on the edge of Varberg, because they have a local aspiration to become one of the surfing hubs and one of the surfing capitals for Europe. So they again felt, I suppose, a bit like the situations in Hanover and Inverness, that actually the introduction of AVs in that area could be really helpful in terms of ferrying people from hotels to restaurants to the beach area itself. So we'll be running a live pilot study with that particular location, but in summertime of next year. Almere in the Netherlands was one of the sites which we've had an opportunity to visit, and you can, I won't point me out in the photograph there, but certainly Almere, I think, are currently in the process of identifying what route they may in fact want to use. And they, I think, are experiencing, or they're experiencing challenges to do with kind of planning and identification of who may provide the vehicles, who may run the vehicles, and how that integrates with the wider transportation system. The other thing that I was going to mention is that together with my colleague Daria, who's just joined our group within the PAV group within Aberdeen, we're also going to be using mobile scanning devices to try to record the experience of actually using these vehicles. So the image that I have on screen at the moment is from a project which was undertaking looking particularly at pedestrian and cycle movement within Aberdeen, where we were able to kind of quite rapidly produce abstracted and in some cases quite beautiful images of sites within the city. This is part of a project called Portus, which was part of the Civitas initiative. we will be rolling out some of these methods in relation to each of the pilot studies within PAV as well, because we feel that it's worked so well as a method to not only rapidly collect kind of geometric information about a site, but also to then represent that back to people to try to stimulate debate. So the website for the project is northsearegion.eu, which is the Interreg North Sea Region site, and then just /PAV. And if you would like to get in touch with me, my email address is on the screen at the moment. Okay, so thanks very much. That was quite rapid, but thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Richard. Very interesting, and I'm definitely going to be heading to Varberg next year. It's quite near where I live, to test out that, have a look at that pilot. It's lovely. I've been on holiday there before. Really beautiful beaches. So yeah, I just have a quick check in the chat on this. There's no specific questions there, but maybe a quick question for me in terms of I mean, you've been looking very much at the application, the specific applications for the different test sites. So it's very much on how you can fit this into for specific users, etc. What are the kinds of impacts that you've been looking at for these different? So, I mean, we talked about safety before, but what are the issues that are coming up there from the test cases?
Well, one of the things that became apparent was that even from the point of our first project meeting, we were able to talk about technical challenges, but for each of the pilot studies, it became apparent that the economic effects of introducing the vehicles were going to be very important. How the introduction of these vehicles might actually affect and potentially improve the lives of users of the vehicles was going to be very important. One of the reasons that I mentioned the work that Daria and I have been doing as well is that coming off a previous project, which was not necessarily about the vehicles, it was about the people that the vehicles might be driving past. That also introduced another stakeholder group that we thought was very important, which are the wider community. That it's almost like the vehicles will have to integrate with that wider community. So a lot of the work that we're doing is actually kind of social science based, but I would say that kind of cultural and economic part of the project is maybe slightly unusual within a project about autonomous vehicles, but we think it's really, really important.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's very important. We'll bring that up again, also in the panel discussion. I look forward to hearing from you again later.
Okay.
Thank you again for your presentation, and we'll move on to our next speaker, which is Wolfgang. So if you could join, welcome very much.
Hi.
And you can, I can hear you perfectly and see you perfectly. It looks lovely. And I like your plants as well in the background. So you can share your presentation and introduce yourself, and you have 10 minutes.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the introduction, Anna. So I hope this works now. My name is Wolfgang Backhaus, as introduced by I work for Rupprecht Consult, leading the team on collective and intelligent mobility. And we were also coordinator of the Coexist project, which I would like to share with you some key aspects and key findings. So I'm sure if you already can see the presentation.
No, we can't see the presentation yet.
Okay.
So we're just...
still in... it's still loading here, I think.
Okay.
Okay, now?
It's coming, it's coming. Black screen,
okay,
it's coming.
Perfect.
Yes, perfect,
okay,
go ahead.
I just started then. Okay. So the project, where did we start with this project? Actually, we heard already the term uncertainty linked to CCAM several times in the presentations before. So when starting to plan for CCAM, or the introduction of automated vehicles, connected automated vehicles, it seems there's a kind of an infinite space of possibilities and potential impacts. So we wanted with this project to try to reduce some of the uncertainties, and we did this with the approach of automation readiness, which we defined as the capability of making structured and informed decisions about the deployment of connected and automated vehicles, which was mainly addressed to road authorities, city authorities, when planning for this kind of mobility. How did we do this? There were three main parts of this automation readiness journey, I would say. We started with automation ready transport modeling. So what we did with this four cities here, you can see on the map, Gothenburg, Helmond, Stuttgart, and Milton Keynes. We improved and developed further their transport models and introduced the CAVs as a new mode in these modeling environments, so that we were able to simulate use cases. And based on these use cases, we analyzed the, let's say, automation readiness of road infrastructure to realize these use cases. And the last part was based on these, let's say, lessons learned through these first parts. We also came then to an automation ready framework for road authorities. So what can cities do already now, or road authorities, to prepare for automation? Let's start with the modeling part. What we actually did is create use cases and played a little bit with the three questions around the market share. So how common are AVs? And in Coexist, we also focus very much on the, let's say, early transition phase. So the coexistence of a lot of conventional cars, you could say, and a few automated vehicles. The AV capabilities, so where can they drive? What infrastructure is actually ready to where they can drive? And AV driving behavior, how do they drive? And actually on this last part, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of the project defining our Coexist driving logics, which you can see here on the right side, ranging from rail-safe, actually separated infrastructure, you could say, driving logic, to via cautious, normal, and the all-knowing, which includes a perfect perception and prediction of the surroundings. And this implies, of course, a high connectivity with the surrounding in urban settings. So we did these preparations and then started to model use cases in the four cities, which are, which reflects a few of these use cases, which were introduced by Richard in the first presentation from Rotterdam and the other Dutch cities. So we ranged here, for example, in Gothenburg from a shared space use case, so a high complexity through and Helmond, for example, a signalized intersection, including pedestrians and cyclists at this site. Milton Keynes modeled a waiting and drop-off area for passengers zone, and we also had a more macroscopic perspective for the region or city of Stuttgart. For example, the impact of driverless car and ride-sharing services on the region. And here I can just say already, or share with you, the result that this is like the other studies mentioned showed already. Traveled kilometers will increase if there's not the right policy setting when you introduce these driverless car and ride-sharing services in the surrounding of Stuttgart. This was the modeling results. Coming to the automation-ready framework, we created, based on the lessons learned and the let's say the work with the cities, this framework, which includes aspects of a mobility system, like the policies, infrastructure, planning part, capacity building, so also competencies and skills needed, the tools, traffic management, and also, of course, the user perspective. We separated or divided this framework into three different stages, which we call the automation awareness, then the part of planning for automation readiness, and then, of course, the preparation for the implementation of automation ready measures. So, and along this path, we did some, you could say, kind of a self-assessment exercise with the cities. Where are they in this framework? What would be next measures maybe to increase and improve the automation readiness of my city? So it's actually a guidance framework, and you could consider it as a kind of a frequently asked questions for cities. What do I really have to answer in terms of automation readiness? The document, of course, the Automation Ready Framework is a core output, so it's available on our website. What I would like to mention as well is that main parts of this work with the Automation Ready Transport Planning Framework is also, or is integrated into the topic guide, or the guidance for CCAM planning, in contextualized for this, let's say, mobility part related to the Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning Guidelines. So we reflected a little bit the Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning Guidelines cycle and process, and tried to include, again, a kind of a frequently asked questions, what needs to be considered at the different phases and steps of the SUMP process. And we will continue the work on this document in other projects. Among them is, for example, the PAVE project just mentioned by Richard from Aberdeen. Also a bit maybe the link between our automation ready framework and where to start and the SUMP process. You can see here on the right side the first phase of a SUMP, so the preparation and analysis phase of an SUMP process. And actually the first step is to evaluate capacities and resources. So this is actually then linked to this exercise of a self-assessment when it comes to planning for CCAM. So what actually are capacity needs we have? How can such a topic be communicated with citizens? What do we have to, let's say, establish there? What are resources and tools required? For example, our models, or even data and knowledge gaps analysis. So what data would we need or knowledge to, for example, have a better scenario analysis based on impacts assessment? So this would be somehow, or this work with the self-assessment or this automation ready framework with the cities led in all the cities to a kind of a action plan where they defined measures to become automation ready. This is just a graph from the self-assessment from Gothenburg, so where you can just see here where they consider themselves in this path. And here's a picture from a workshop we had with the city of Stuttgart and mobility related departments from the city to discuss actually more a joint understanding of the CCAM topic, and to analyze what are our first priorities when it comes to the introduction of CCAM and what do we expect. What are key findings? First of all, as mentioned, reduce uncertainties, and we made the, let's say, key learning that this automation ready modeling or robust modeling of these use cases is really a kind of an entry point to discuss more informed use cases and identify, okay, where could automated vehicles drive, what type of services should we maybe prioritize, and what level of automation and market penetration rate is needed to maybe exploit the full potential and benefits of automated vehicles.
Hi, Wolfgang.
Yeah.
Can you, I know you're almost on your last slide, but your 10 minutes is up, so if you could round up.
Okay. Sorry, then I just quickly go through this. We can have this discussion, the panel discussion. So what we actually recognized is maybe one key message, that the last bullet point, it's really important to prepare for the negative impacts of the transition phase, this transition phase, as we saw for all the use cases, that at an early stage with a cautious driving behavior of automated vehicles, it's actually the case that conventional vehicles will be a kind of a barrier to fully exploit the potential of automated vehicles in such scenarios and settings. So it's not really a heaven scenario which we analyzed, but a more sober impact assessment leading to partly hell scenarios in this case. And maybe I leave it here and we can discuss then in the panel discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Wolfgang. I liked at the beginning that you said that there's an infinite number of possibilities and possible impacts, and it's quite a job to kind of narrow that down. If I can just have one very quick question before we move on to our next speaker.
Sure.
In terms of, I see that Suzanne's asking questions, so I'll take her question instead. Should cities consider banning conventional vehicles in cities in order to reap the benefits of CAVs? There you go.
Difficult question. I think this is, of course, not an option for the early transition phase, but I think it is, of course, a policy setting or a measure which you could discuss for certain transition areas. So where maybe only automated, connected and automated vehicles are allowed, to really then also consider this as an experimental design and setting where you can see what could the future really look like. But in general, tricky question. I think there will be different transition areas maybe possible in cities. Yeah.
Good. I will take that one up later as well, okay. Definitely. Right, thank you very much, and we'll see you later as well after the break. Okay, so, welcome to our final speaker, Apostolos. You may share your screen and introduce yourself. Let us know who you are.
Yes, let's see. Does this work?
Yes, we can see your screen and we can see you and hear you perfectly. So go ahead.
Okay, great. So hello everyone. I am Apostolos Ziakopoulos and I am a senior researcher in the National Technical University of Athens, Department of Transport Planning and Engineering. And today I hope to give you a short peek into the development of the LEVITATE policy support tool. The LEVITATE project is a joint effort by several partners in order to develop such a policy support tool which will aid the assessment of societal level impacts of connected and automated vehicles. And it is an ongoing process which we hope will yield fruitful and interesting results to stakeholders, city authorities, researchers, and everyone who is involved in the planning for automation. So, the LEVITATE project essentially is an effort, a joint effort focusing on the development of a new impact assessment framework in order to enable all the policymakers to manage the introduction of connected and automated transport systems and to be able to maximize the benefits that we expect these systems will bring and utilize technologies to achieve societal objectives. It is very interesting to see that the speakers today focused very much on sub-use case automation, sub-use case implementation, and the examination of how these technologies are expected to materialize and what we can expect. LEVITATE has a scope of being transferable to the greatest amount that we can provide it at present, and I believe that it will be quite a nice tool to complement the ongoing effort. The project partners come from several countries across Europe. It is led by Loughborough University in the UK, and we have partners from Austria, AIT, AIMSAN from Spain, us and TUA, we come from Greece. Polish, our hosts, are also involved very enthusiastically. Netherlands, Norway, and we have also been involved with several city authorities such as Transport for Greater Manchester, City of Vienna, and other partners. And we are now entering the third and final year of the project, and we expect to have a working policy support tool at the end of the coming year. And this all is done within the Horizon 2020 framework. A rough, an abstract organization chart is shown in the right. I won't go into details now, but all this is also available online. So what we are aiming to do is to consolidate the outputs of several automation use cases that concern public transport and passenger cars and freight transport into an overall integrated framework for the assessments of impacts, benefits and costs for connected and automated systems. And in order to increase transferability, we of course include different automation penetration levels as a constant variable. And we also anticipate implementations on different time horizons. The project has analyzed user needs for such a decision support tool, a policy support tool, and this has been done with the aid of 3 stakeholder reference groups. And this will all lead to, this has all been leading to the development and implementation of the toolkit and the policy support tool, which essentially will allow the users to test various policy scenarios on the basis of the provided needs, and will incorporate both forecasting and backcasting approaches. And all this, the capstone of all this is the provision of policy recommendations, which is done either quantitatively, by measuring certain impacts and projecting these impacts in the future, or projecting from these impacts in order to set specific goals. And it's also provided qualitatively with certain reports and description of case studies and thorough documentation of the methodology. So this is what we are working on. This is the current structure of the policy support tool. There have been several iterations to it as the project matures and progresses. This is our release number 5, which has been solidified in June. And we expect it to have 2 pillars. So there will be one knowledge module and one estimator module, the 2 great pillars that it will comprise. The knowledge module is expected to be more static, though fully searchable, and will have all the documentation that we have been creating and that we have also gathered from the scientific bibliography, but also there will be the documentation of practical results within LEVITATE, documentation of how our tools operate and how our methodological background operates and is implemented in the tool. And of course, there is the most important field that is open for guidelines and policy recommendations to all the users. In parallel, there is the estimator module, which is the dynamic part of the system. It is a calculator with several subsections. It will be fully interactive and fully accessible online and open for everyone. We have already started laying the groundwork for it, and there is ongoing development. Mainly for now, it is going to be designed in the JavaScript, but there is also an option for additional functionalities that can be designed in other environments. And the main subsystems that we have been designing are the following: is the forecasting subsystem, which essentially we used to predict impacts in the future, the backcasting subsystem, the CBA module, and case study examples. It is very important to stress that the users can freely enter their own values in the calculator modules, and they can play with whatever they consider more appropriate for their specific examples and their specific automation sub-use cases. So a quick overview of the knowledge module, what we have been compiling so far. it is based on the conceptual framework that the NTUA has proposed. It refers to both bibliography and project results. There is, of course, a lot of ongoing literature concerning the impact assessment of the connected and automated systems, or CATS for short. And apart from the more heavy and scientific literature, which of course is not going to be is not going to be very useful for everyone, there is also the detailed documentation of each sub-use case that has been prepared within the project. And there have been short synopses for ease that will summarize its use case and sub-use case of automation that we have examined. And the project results concern both case studies and impact assessment. And we want to provide information regarding both the scenarios and the baseline conditions that have been adopted. And of course, to make very clear all the assumptions that have been made and all the limitations that are relevant, so that we increase transparency and we also increase transferability to other areas. And of course, the showcasing of the exact case study results. And of course, there is a thorough documentation of the LEVITATE methods that have been ongoing. I will not go into much detail here, but there has been an ongoing effort with combined methods of microsimulation method, the Delphi panel, and the system dynamics approaches in order to combine them all into a more spherical output that concerns all the examined impacts. And all this methodological background will be existing on the tool as well as the assumptions and limitations. And of course, the guideline excerpts for any recommendations and guidelines provided to policymakers regarding the connected and automated systems. We would believe that it will be useful if it is fully searchable and fully accessible by all users, and this is how we have been designing this tool. I would like to move to the forecasting.
Sorry, 10 minutes is a very short time, I'm afraid. Your 10 minutes is up, so could you wrap up now, and then we'll take some of the points later as well.
So the forecasting estimator is also being developed, as I said. We have a more detailed approach as to what market penetration rates we are expecting and how pessimistic or optimistic will be each scenario will be. And of course, we are working into these steps, which I will go into more detail later with the extra material in the panel. And of course, the target is to reach a comprehensive calculator that examines measures and impacts in parallel. And essentially, the users will be able to get information about both in forecasting and in backcasting about what the intervention would be more appropriate for their targets and what can be expected if they implement specific sub-use cases. So yes, I will be wrapping up now. And let us say that in the future, we have been working into finalizing both the cost-benefit module and the development of the more appropriate user interface so that everyone is able to access this tool and assess the LEVITATE project findings. So yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So sorry that you didn't get through all the presentation, but there's some interesting stuff in those slides as well, so everyone will have access to that after the conference. And we will take up these issues again later. So we did maybe just have a quick question before we have our coffee break then. I'm just, I mean, this would be great when this tool is finished. Is this going to be something that a city can go to and say, we're interested in, we don't know very much about autonomous vehicles. What can we find out from this tool? Like, just really shortly, what is it they're gonna get from this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is both a projection for the general network behavior that we will expect as a baseline as automation progresses. So even if the cities do nothing, if they do not do any intervention, they can still have an image of what the 20 impacts that are examined within the project will be. So there will be information about how travel time fluctuates, how emissions fluctuate, amount of travel, in distance-related figures, and of course there is a road safety aspect with conflicts and crashes being examined. And apart from that, there is a more critical benefit that we have been examining 9 sub-use cases for passenger cars, urban transport and freight transport that are more specific, and each city can examine what to expect if they are going to implement, for instance, an automated shuttle service in a large scale, if they implement dedicated lanes for autonomous vehicles or different parking pricing schemes. So it is both a general scope tool for the field of automation as it progresses and a more specific tool for specific interventions. We expect everyone to be able to get informative results out of it, and this has been worked into its design as well.
Great. Thank you very much. And we'll hear more from you later. So now is it's time, if we just go to my next slide, for the break. So thank you very much. It was really interesting information we got there from all of our speakers, and I know I'm full of interesting questions for them that I'm going to ask them in the panel discussion. So I encourage you to go now and check out the networking and the expo and think up some tricky questions for the speakers, so you can ask them in the chat during our panel discussion. We'll see you back at 11:15. We'll be starting again for the panel discussion. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you in 25 minutes. Hello. It's 11:15, so let's get started. Can I have all of my speakers back on stage for the panel discussion then? Here you come. I hope you've had a nice coffee break. Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's one positive thing, right, about working from home, is that always good quality, in my case tea, but coffee. So we're missing one person, yes, from Greece. Okay, we'll wait a second. I've been thinking a bit about these presentations that we had before the break, and I was thinking a lot about especially what Wolfgang has been talking about, this introduction. I really liked it, this infinite number of possible futures and impacts that we can have from this. And we're trying to narrow down this space that we have to understand where we have agency to change that and drive the introduction of new technology in a specific way. I'm going to, I'll just go to the chat as well. So I'd like to, the way we're going to go through this is I have some questions prepared for the speakers that will get them going. I will ask them questions. If there are any other questions that participants would like to ask, you put them in the chats and they will be pinned, and I will see those and I can ask those questions as well to the speakers. If it's for a particular person, write that in your message. I will ask you some questions, and because I can see you all, if you want to speak and you have a dying need to say something, you can put up your hand. We'll do it the old-fashioned way, so you can just put up your hand and then I'll see that you want to speak. So we have 1 hour to do this and discuss these infinite possibilities, Wolfgang. I'm going to start actually with you. We'll see if our friend from Greece drops in again. I can't do anything about that. So he will either come or not, and I guess the POLIS helpers will follow up with him. But we can start with you, Wolfgang. What happens if we don't plan at all?
Difficult question.
Yes.
Well, I think I would not say we create maybe chaos in our cities, but definitely I think we need to guide somehow the introduction of automated vehicles. And actually, I think we're not planning for automated vehicles because we are planning for mobility, for sustainable mobility. So I think at first, actually, we need to find out what are really the impacts. And I think projects like LEVITATE will help us a lot in this case. Because this is actually the question where you start. It's why should we do this? And the why is really much linked to the impacts. So why should we really, for this mobility goal we have for our city, introduce connected and automated vehicles? What is really the benefit? And I think as long as we're not there to have a clearer picture, I think it's really this modeling and narrowing down of potential futures. And this is linked to actually a totally paradigm shift of planning, how cities plan today. It's not the predict and act, it's more agile. You actually do something. It's a bit to understand failure. We maybe have to learn to fail, get the lessons learned, and adapt and go this path. But this is, of course, something which cities are not really used to do, I would say.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, just to point there, Apostolos, could you just mute, because there's a little bit of feedback from your mic. Perfect, thank you. If you want to speak, you can. Yes, Sergio, you wanted to say something there.
Yes, indeed, I agree with Wolfgang. At least from the city perspective, many times it's very difficult to plan in advance for something which is not clear enough. And planning in cities also takes a lot of time. I mean, all the let's say, legal and administrative procedures. So it's really kind of a burden. So I agree with his vision on maybe what we should do is to think in the impacts and try to set sort of a minimum set of requirements or basic rules or just the framework to try to be ready for the impacts that they may bring in the future. But it's kind of difficult to plan such a complex topic, automation, in advance, and I really see it like a huge challenge.
Mm. So both of you are in agreement that this is not something that we should ignore. We definitely have to do something. We don't know what will happen if we don't plan for it. We also need to understand that. I think this is also relevant to something that you brought up, Richard. Richard from Rotterdam, that is, from your case, and you were talking about that you had to design infrastructure in a flexible way. How do you do that? How do you design infrastructure when you have these very long planning processes? What does that mean, and how can you do that? Richard, we can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, well, in fact, that's the question for us too. We're really looking, and it's difficult because the last question you asked is gonna make a problem now, not in the coming 5 years, maybe not even in the coming decade, but eventually it will lead to a problem if you don't do anything about it, and especially in the case of infrastructure where you have lead times of decades. You have to think about it now, change things now, but we ask the question now, we really think about it, about how can you make it flexible, maybe by design, maybe by digitally or something, but I don't have the answer yet, so if somebody could help us too, it would be nice.
Other Richard has the answer there. No, maybe not. Go ahead, Richard.
I don't necessarily have the answer, but I think that our experience of working on this project, it reminds me a bit of my background is more within kind of wider cities and urbanism and architecture, where it reminds me of the introduction of digital technologies within those related industries, where you can look at it from a lens where it's kind of driven by technology. But that wasn't terribly successful in terms of increasing adoption of the technology itself. The technology will only be adopted if people can see a usefulness for it and if they can kind of understand how it's maybe solving certain problems. And I think this is one of the things that we're looking at within the PAV project, but also within Art Forum and other projects as well, is to kind of understand that although our project is about autonomous vehicles, the way that it is going to be adopted is going to be dependent on the situation. So the work that we're doing up in Orkney, for example, the way that autonomous vehicles might be adopted within social care or access to health for older members of the community, for example, will require a different road mapping to the introduction of AVs to move freight within the airport, or in relation to autonomous sea vessels and so on. So I think it maybe is part of the answer, actually, is to think that we can do so much looking at this from an AV perspective, but the scenarios within which the AV is going to be applied is going to be probably more important. Yeah.
Right, back to you, Wolfgang.
Yes, maybe some findings also from the Coexist project, from this modeling exercise. Not sure about flexible infrastructure, but clearly we saw that in a first step, we should focus on infrastructure elements where the potential impact can clearly be exploited in an early stage in this transition phase, which is more structured infrastructure elements like arterial roads, intersections, etc. From our experience, we would not say start with roundabouts or shared spaces or whatever. So I think this is something which cities should have a look like, which automation readiness level have our infrastructure elements, and where can maybe this transition phase and the coexistence of automated and conventional vehicles lead to a benefit. And I think from a digitalization perspective, CITS seems clearly a key enabler in our models and simulations, as the all-knowing driving logic really created the benefits. And I think CITS, in terms of optimizing already traffic flow and traffic management of the conventional cars, makes the integration a lot easier for the automated vehicles in this system. Yeah.
And I'll just pass on to Apostolos there very quickly, because this idea about having the different levels of penetration of autonomous vehicles, it's something that you've also looked at within your project. So what are your findings there? Like, at what point do you really start having to take this into consideration?
It's a very tricky question, because it is we expect the more we look at it, the more secondary and tertiary cascading effects we discover that might be there. So within LEVITATE, we have decided to use a simpler approach than the 5 levels that are conventionally thought about. We decided to utilize the cautious AV and the more aggressive AV idea. So the reasoning is that at the start there will be more cautious vehicles roaming the roads as the first vehicles, and then more aggressive AVs are going to be proposed by manufacturers that have gotten the hang of it. And we have seen several how should I say it, several fluctuations whenever this market penetration share changes. So I believe that there will be the transition phases will be very interesting for everyone and for the cities involved. But the use of ITS is one reasonable thing to do to be able to anticipate some of the effects there. So I agree with Wolfgang essentially.
Mm. Yeah, it's a bit on a sliding scale here. I'll go to one of the questions that we've had from our participants. If you could mute yourself again, Apostolos, that'd be great. And it's also brought up by quite a few of you earlier on about what is going to happen to vehicle kilometers and or passenger kilometers that you've discussed a lot. It's going to, a lot of you mentioned that it's likely that it might increase. What is this doing about the goal of reducing congestion, which is a very important? Who wants to take on that question first? Sergio, go ahead.
Yes, indeed. I saw the question on the chat box, and I fully agree that congestion might be a big problem if we are not capable to manage this. I have seen also that Suzanne from POLIS also mentioned the POLIS position paper on connected and automated vehicles, and I encourage you to take a read on that document, because it reflects very well this problematic and also the vision from the point of view of cities about it. It is true that in terms of decarbonization, they may help, but because they are directly linked to the use of electric mobility. So from that point of view, unless we take, the well-to-wheel cycle, and maybe we charge the vehicles with electricity coming from coal factories, I guess they will help in decarbonizing transport. But on the other hand, there is a risk, and we have seen that risk also with the new mobility shared services such as e-scooters or e-mopeds, that there can be a shift from maybe more sustainable trips towards automated vehicle trips, and that can increase congestion and traffic. And that is a situation we always would like to avoid. The less vehicles we have, the better. And we must also kind of bring to the forefront of the discussion the relevance of collective public transport. I mean, we can't cope all the daily trips we have in big cities with automated vehicles, no matter if they're smartest ones, and that is something we need to take into account.
Go ahead, Apostolos.
Yes, I would also like to add that despite the fact that we're talking about autonomous vehicles and all the algorithms and the AI that this might entail, there is a huge part of a behavioral aspect, both in the amount of travel demand and how people see transport. And for instance, we might view huge, we might come across huge trips being generated from people that could not travel before, such as the elderly or impaired people. Even there have been some propositions about children using completely autonomous vehicles alone. And there is also the thing to consider, the driver behavior of conventional drivers when autonomous vehicles will be around, because I can easily imagine vehicles being manufactured, in the countries with higher safety standards, being exploited by conventional drivers in more aggressive countries, so to speak, and having to decelerate all the time and stop all the time because of lane changing and things like that. So we might come across very unexpected effects, and we might see many delays being generated, much congestion which was unaccounted for due to such cultural or road culture, so to say, discrepancies. So it's a very tricky question, and I completely agree also with Sergio that there is no going around public transport in big cities. For instance, Athens, my home city, is a city of 5 million people. I've lived in London a bit as well. You can't cope with everyone, despite the fact that headways might be reduced or anything of the sort. So all of these, external factors will play a critical part for me as well. Yeah.
Wolfgang, and then Richard.
Yeah, maybe a comment on the congestion topic. Looking at our big cities like Athens, for example, congestion reduction through automated vehicles can, of course, be achieved, because you have a better throughput. You can actually drive up closer, etc. So tuning and all these things that might lead to such an effect. But this, of course, is based on the assumption that we don't put more cars into the system. So actually, there is a potential, but I think this is, again, policy question. Maybe there need to be some policies, shared vehicles first, and then have a look at these transition areas where there might be potential conflicts between conventional cars and automated cars. So I think it's a tricky question for urban settings, actually, on inner cities. In the suburban area or the neighboring communities, we saw from Stuttgart, for example, that actually where you haven't had a good accessibility to public transport, actually, this is something where you don't get rid of your own personal car, but you use the shared and these shared services or these ride services actually in addition. And this is really leading to cannibalism effect of other modes, of carbon modes. Yeah.
And you had also something to add to that, Richard from Aberdeen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Wolfgang said there reminded me of work that my colleagues in Bremen have been doing with Share North and so on, looking at shared transport. But I did kind of wonder that one of the ways that we could maybe think about how do we avoid this problem of congestion is to reflect on what has happened during 2020. And this has led to, okay, initially problems with us not being able to run our pilots and so on. Coming out of the initial very strong lockdown in parts of Europe, we have seen an increase in the amount of road traffic because people are now less willing to use public transportation because of a need to socially distance and so on. But I don't think we can ignore the fact that between March and, say, around about August in Scotland, everybody was told that they had to work from home if they possibly could, and a lot of people managed to do that. And we did see huge reductions in the amount of traffic that was actually on the road. So I think, to relate back to your first question, Anna, about planning, I think if we can look at this strategically and try to think about things like the 20-minute or the 15-minute neighbourhood and try to support people to maybe not have to travel as much as they were before for things like commuting to and from work, then it potentially frees up part of that road network for other things that maybe didn't previously take place. My concern, though, is that coming out of the pandemic, that we have seen an increase in road traffic, which I hadn't necessarily foreseen happening. And I think we need to do something strategic at the moment to address this, because otherwise, I mean, one of the problems that we have with Hanover, for example, is that they're worried about it's quite a long route. It's not unnecessarily all on a dedicated lane. They're worried about like leaves on the road, potentially causing emergency stops for vehicles and so on. We can only imagine what problems we would have trying to have autonomous vehicles in a traffic system which is even more congested than it is at the moment. So I think something that connects transport planning with urban planning and also a kind of an understanding of how people lead their lives is going to be really important.
And I think that's a good point. And another thing that you kind of allude to there, but you haven't mentioned it, but has been mentioned before in the presentations, and I've also seen it in the chat quite a bit, is this issue of regulation. So the extreme which Suzanne had in her provocative question about should we be banning cars from city centres, that's the extreme level of regulation. But it seems from what all you're saying, there is this isn't just about the design and the planning and ensuring that you're ready, but it's also about regulation. It plays a very important role here. To what extent do you need to have that regulation to ensure, I mean, not just that the AVs are gonna not be increasing congestion, but that we are, as cities, reducing the amount of congestion in cities? How much regulation is required, and is that possible within the democratic societies that we work in when we know that reducing cars? I know this is a very big question, so anybody would like to say something about that? Sergio.
Yeah, I agree that we need some sort of regulation, but it is true that sometimes soft regulations may work better. I am just specifically thinking of some kind of prospective articles I saw some time ago that said that, well, potentially when these autonomous vehicles arrive to the market, I mean the full automated ones, people may want to buy one to make a business out of it while they are not using it. So they bring you to the office and then you send your car to make business such as a Uber or something like that. And that will be, for instance, that is one of the examples that should be, I think, taken into account when defining regulations. Not very into, banned areas in cities, but the way vehicles are used for. So I think we should try to avoid what has happened, for instance, with the vehicles with driving, I don't know what's the literal translation in English, but such as Uber or that sort of ride-hailing services, which have really pop up with thousands of licenses, and people is really keen to use them because it's comfortable, it's easy, it's convenient, and you just click it on the phone and you just get it. But maybe we should try to think on which are the appropriate uses for autonomous vehicles, and just think on that side of the picture. Yeah, I mean, in terms of regulation, I think that would be the basic to start with, maybe. My personal desire would be to see autonomous vehicles first in some sort of services, perhaps, not just private mobility, but that I think it's something that will be mostly led by private, by the market and by the OEM. So it's not so easy to make a perspective on that.
I'm going to actually, I saw that a couple of you had your hands up as well, but maybe you can answer this question. I think it's interesting, that's just come up from Wolfgang. I can't pronounce your surname, sorry. Interestingly, we are always talking about general regulations when the CCAM discussions enters the city. This is a good indication that automation is not the key measure we need in the cities. Is he right? Is automation not the key measure we need in cities? Go on then, Wolfgang.
I don't think it's hard to say if it will be key, because as we said before, we don't know, we don't have the entire picture about the impact. So I think looking really far ahead to, and maybe that's the key question, for example, if we look at the Green Deal mission to have carbon neutral cities by 2050, cities should ask the question, what is actually the puzzle piece to reach this goal, which CCAM could provide to this mission? And I see regulation, it's a bit how we define regulation. I mean, for me, regulation could also be something like a sustainable urban mobility plan, which gives a clear guidance on what needs to be maybe regulated in terms to achieve our mobility goals. And here I don't see then regulation also as it's linked often to barrier or doing something not. I clearly see regulations also as a kind of an innovation path, which you could have when you clearly regulate from the beginning with a certain goal of an impact you would like to reach.
Mm. In terms of this, I mean, it's a very good point. Going back to what you said about the decarbonisation thing, I want to know, I think, you know, it's actually quite expensive. There's a development of a lot of technology to develop these autonomous, automated vehicles. And we're saying that they need to be in very specific use cases. It's not in general. We need to think a lot about them. Is it not simpler to just, you know, work more on getting more people cycling in cities? We're talking about cities, getting more people cycling. It's a lot cheaper. Redesigning road space in that way. When we're thinking of decarbonisation, we say, well, they have to all be electric anyway. Is there anything within the fact that you have automated vehicles that actually contributes to decarbonisation of transport systems? Is this something that is really going to help, or is it, well, they are electric anyway and they're good for other reasons?
Oops. At least from the Spanish perspective, the road truck traffic, interurban and long distance road truck traffic is huge, but really huge. And despite the potential impact on employment, I think, for instance, automation would be really, really interesting to explore for this type of trips. And they could become much more efficient. And I think that would be one of the examples. And I fully agree with you. I mean, within cities, soft modes and public transport would remain as the backbone. Any scenario we may think of, I think those would be the backbones of the mobility system. And automation can bring some additional advantages, but always as a complementary option, I guess.
Go ahead, Apostolos.
Yes, I'd also like to add that, again, from my perspective, from the Greek perspective, we can see that we are a very motorized country and have very low cycling percentages and very low sustainable mode percentages. And this is perhaps a part due to the available infrastructure and part to the morphology of it's a very steep and mountainous country at times. But I can see this as two parallel venues. So you can incentivize people to cycle, but I also believe that there is a very important and very critical part of the public that need a motorized vehicle for various reasons, and they will not be pursued to cycling. But however, when the onset of automation finally arrives and is here, they will be persuaded, they can be persuaded rather with some incentives to switch to an automated vehicle, to switch to a cleaner vehicle. And this is an opportunity during that large gap to achieve certain reductions in emissions and certain milestones. So I believe that these two goals should be pursued in parallel, rather than one in favor of the other, especially in more unique cases regarding societies.
Richard from Rotterdam, did you have something to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I think that if automation can benefit something in this is that I agree with Sergio that it will be in the line of automation of vehicles, and it shouldn't be only the big vehicles or the cars or something, but also the public transport and all those smaller kinds of new concepts. So I think in the end, if done right, public transport can be more efficient, more open to other groups of people, and therefore maybe less, maybe larger groups used more efficient and cleaner transport. That would be the best scenario, but it needs a lot of attention by the governments.
Mm-hmm. And if we sort of summarize that a bit, there are specific places where it's going to be useful and it's really going to contribute to policy goals. And that is particularly in the interurban, I think, as Sergio has pointed out, in terms of decarbonization in any case. So I think why should we be caring so much? I mean, there is a lot of hype about these vehicles. It's died down now, but there's still a lot of hype. Why should we care so much about this in cities? Why are we paying attention to it in an urban context? And I think maybe I would also wondering if you've got anything to say about freight transport in here. I'd be interested to hear. Apostolos?
Regarding the first part, I believe it is, it is a very critical turning point. Because, for instance, when you had the motorization of cities back in at least for my country, after the 50s and starting in the 60s, you saw certain interventions that have been there and have been remaining for decades to come. So I believe it will be the early stages of automation will be fertile ground if policymakers and all the stakeholders would like to propose such radical changes. And after some thought and of course some practical examples, we can see, for instance, venues that will transform the cities in a more extended way. If we, for instance, exclude the city centers and prohibit conventional vehicles from getting there and only allow automated vehicles for pickup and departure, then it will be very critical, and it will cascade outside the small, figuratively speaking, the small extension of just traffic management and traffic engineering regulation. So I think it will be a very opportune moment to take the right steps towards, for instance, the European Green Deal goals and things like that. And freight transport, I believe that it can be revolutionized as well, because in areas where you have, for instance, very tight commercial areas, you can transform them by making regulations about trucks, making regulations so that only automated trucks can deliver certain goods in certain areas, to avoid misuse, to avoid the misuse of parking and things like that. So I believe that with the right incentives and with the right starting points, we can achieve much, and we can achieve impacts that will stay for years to come.
Thank you. Richard from Rotterdam.
Yeah, to answer your question, even specific also about logistics, we've done some research about urban logistics in relation to automation. So, a first scan of what we're talking about, because we are into automation and we want to plan ahead, but also because we will implement a zero emission zone in 2025 for city logistics. So we were interested in, could this benefit each other? Because we're talking a lot about this technical development of automation, but it's not a goal on itself for the city. We could, if it's say it harsh, we could care less. It's about livability, about the climate, about air quality, that kind of thing. So if we can bring those two together, and you see that that's very difficult in logistics. They have to experience it. I mean, those warehouses are automated on a large scale already. So if they can use that experience in the city center as a big warehouse, it could be one of those first steps. But I've only seen very few examples yet in practice to do pilots on this level at this moment. At this moment, we are in a project called Harmony, where we are modeling about what could be the potential of automation in logistics, and there's one of those one of those van drivers who will test in our city to see what will happen.
Thank you, Sergio.
Just linked to what Richard was mentioning, we are now involved in a project called LEAD about the use of digital twins for helping urban logistics, and the Lyon Living Lab will explore the use of autonomous vehicles for freight. POLIS network is involved as a partner in this project, so that's something that is still on the roadmap.
Great, thank you. And I'd just like to remind all of those who are listening out there, I know you have questions, don't be shy, put them on the chat and I will ask them to our panel. I'll move on now to another question. We're talking about planning for automated vehicles. So what do you think are the key points that the urban and transport planners really need to take into consideration? I mean, you brought some of this up in your presentations, but also maybe reflect a bit on what are the barriers to this. So what do they need to do, and then what are the barriers?
Well, to point maybe the first one, I think from a city perspective, at the moment we're kind of concerned about the infrastructure and all the communication side. cities tend to be very compact, and many times you have problems of connectivity. So when thinking about automation, we always try to bring the message that all the, let's say, communication side should remain on the vehicle, but not on the city itself. Otherwise, it can be really complicated to cover properly all the dimension, all the urban dimension. So that would be maybe some of the topics which at the moment are on discussion or under discussion.
Mm. And is that something the rest of you see, that there's this question of having the communications in the vehicles and not in the cities, and it's difficult to cover the city with the right communication technology? I can imagine that's... Yes, Richard.
Certainly with the work that my colleague David was doing in Orkney, this came up as a potential weakness or threat to the adoption of the technology. A kind of concerns about the availability of a 5G network, for example, in rural areas or outside of urban areas. And also, I wasn't sure if this is exactly what Sergio was getting at, but a lot of the scenarios that we looked at, particularly with vehicles for older people and for school children and so on, the role of the driver on the vehicle extends quite far beyond physically driving the vehicle. The role of having a human being who's in charge of the vehicle is also to do with care of the passengers and making people feel that making people feel at ease. And in the absence of that, there needs to be this issue needs to be addressed so that people will feel comfortable actually using the new technology. Because it's different. It's different to just going onto a monorail, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question about this this people-centric approach. I think we'll come back to that in a question in a second. There was a question on our chat from Anna that says a lot of cities are planning for connectivity first and then autonomy. Do you agree with this? I see nodding from Sergio. Quite simple question. How is that from the city of Rotterdam, Richard? You're muted.
Yes,
still.
sorry. Again, this is of this discussion about autonomy, which is far more broader than autonomy. If you're talking about 5G, G5, then it's about many other things. So it's a very broad discussion, I think. So I'm not sure if it's one of the first or the other. It will be simultaneously, I think, but it also should be something where the industry has to show how they are working, because I've seen all kind of examples, even work with all kind of techniques together and so on and so on, and we cannot think of develop that as a city ourselves. So we have to discuss this with the industry and the countries.
Mm. So then there's the role there between this cooperation between the private and the public sector. I'd like actually to go back to Richard's points on this people-centric approach. We're dealing with a new technology, and this is the human-machine interface in a totally new level. It's not just a little screen that we're designing, but it's a whole vehicle, it's a whole transport system. There is a machine, it's a robot, essentially. To what extent is the engagement of citizens in designing services important to have acceptability in this? And what have you done? What have you looked at on this aspect? And maybe I can go back to Richard first, because it was a point I know that you work on.
Well, I can see a couple of the other speakers want to say something as well. But I mean, this has kind of been a thread running through all of the projects that we've engaged with AV, and we've kind of found that it's not necessarily possible to do this in a broad brush way. You have to look at individual scenarios to understand who the stakeholders might be. Now, sometimes they're going to be common between groups. The municipal authority, for example, would usually be a stakeholder in all of the discussions. But depending on, like you were alluding to, Anna, depending on whether you were talking about freight or if you were talking about movement of people, the stakeholder groups are going to be slightly different. One of the things that we have found in Orkney is that it does have a municipal authority which has kind of embraced technological innovation. So I think they see this as being part of a continuum. They've also been very forward thinking in terms of renewable energy sources and that kind of a thing as well. So I think having the buy-in from the politicians is actually quite important, but then kind of making sure that the people who will actually use the technology understand what it is, what problem it's trying to solve, and how it might make their lives or their businesses a little bit better is going to be really important. Yeah, I'll be quiet.
That's great, thank you. Wolfgang.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we have to take the citizens with us on this journey. But for citizens, I mean, what are we talking about? It's imagination for them. I mean, how many people have really seen an automated car driving or have experienced this? So this is a lot of, I think, research on acceptability, on perception of these cars. And we are part of the WISE Act cost action on European level, where there was a Eurobarometer survey. I'm looking forward to the results. So really asking this question about the perception of AVs and would you use them under which conditions. And this were also part of some of the Coexist cities self-assessment workshops. They really discussed with targeted user groups like disabled people, young people, older people, what are really your mobility needs and how could fit maybe CCAM here. And I think this is the way. I mean, when we talk about participation and engagement, it's often, okay, would you prefer option A or B? It's more, we need to start earlier. We really need to have this co-design, co-creation process to take the people with us, I think, for the CCAM topic.
Are you doing that in Madrid, Sergio? You're muted.
The comment I wanted to make regarding this user-centric approach and also linked to the behavioral aspect is that I guess we will have, when autonomous vehicles arrive on a general basis, we will have early adopters, will be willing to use them, but I think a big part of the population and citizens will be kind of reluctant until the liability topics are clear enough. I think there is a potential risk ahead in terms of also equity and accessibility aspects to mobility. I was thinking also about, for instance, if you have a autonomous car manufacturer providing a premium subscription that entitles you high priority, and then if you don't have the money, you buy a low cost autonomous vehicle, and then you wait for hours to access a motorway, for instance. So there are many things which are not clear enough. And I think that will really be something very important in terms of how it will affect the behavioral change from our own side. And that's something that concerns me, to be honest.
Apostolos,
yes, I'd like to also touch on the topic road safety, which is my specialization, and I remember studying, the impacts of automation back in 2017, and apart from the scientific literature, I was amazed by how the development process was recorded and how certain accidents of the manufacturers, such as Tesla or Google, that had one or two fatalities, were highlighted by the press and how they were projected. And I came to understand that in order for these technologies to be widely used and accepted, there will have to be certain steps that are absolutely required to be taken. There will need to be, for instance, a highlighting of while there might be still crashes with autonomous vehicle, and of course nobody expects them to be perfect, and nobody expects 100% road safety improvements from autonomous vehicles. Meanwhile, conventional vehicles still have extremely high, fatalities, serious injuries, and all the rest of the adverse consequences. So if we can advertise, for instance, as transport experts collectively that, we are not bringing something perfect, but we're bringing something that has even 50% improvement, then it will be very critical to the eyes of the public, and it will elevate the acceptance of the technologies in a much faster degree than otherwise. Because I believe that this is one of the highest, doubts in the minds of people when they see a vehicle that is self-piloted, and that they are, at the mercy of a machine or at the mercy of the algorithm. But if there can be proper communication to show that these vehicles are actually safer, then it will gradually ease the onset, I believe.
And I think it's almost like I have regularly, I work in Copenhagen, I've regularly traveled on autonomous vehicles because they have an autonomous metro line in Copenhagen. So I wouldn't say it's even an issue for anybody who travels on that metro line anymore. It's a little bit of the introduction. I'm going to go back to the couple of interesting questions that have come in the chat now, so we can have a look at that. From Essen Kurse, sorry for pronunciation. The discussion on AVs is mostly approached from the city perspective. That's understandable in this context. But how about the impact on rural areas? Can AVs be the tipping point for these areas to recover the local economy there due to urbanization and make these areas attractive again, or make the connection between cities and rural areas better? Any thoughts on that? Lots of smiles. Yes, go ahead.
Again, difficult question, but I think the perspective we need to have here is more from a, let's say, functional urban area perspective. So really consider the next to each other rural and urban centers as a system in terms, for example, of commuters. So I think for commuting, where maybe also road infrastructure like arterial roads and others structured road elements are used, I think clearly see a benefit in using maybe CAVs for this to have a better throughput, etc. But do these cars then really have to enter the urban area, the city center? This is I think the question, and here comes back then to the design of a really integrated system. And I think here the key public transport. Public transport is really the backbone of these systems, and we need to ensure that public transport reach a higher accessibility in the rural areas, because our modeling clearly shows in the rural areas, if there is ride sharing, etc. offered, the mileages go up, the kilometers go up, because it's more comfortable to go maybe there. That you take a trip which you would not have taken, and I think this is something we have to consider really for the rural areas. How can we improve the accessibility through an integrated system with public transport as a backbone?
Yeah. Richard from Rotterdam.
Yeah, I want to add to it that it looks like if the discussion is about cities, and as you said, that's perception in this context, but I think it only started a few years ago, and therefore it was predominantly about highways. So we entered first in the discussion because we saw a lot of things were about highways, and there was nothing about when it drives off the highway. So I think a lot of discussions has done, and also, of course, about the rural areas. Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I mean,
Sergio.
I think in rural areas, the advantages will be the same as today's on-demand transport. In those places in rural areas where you have these services, life is improving and the mobility is improving. The point is that you will do that without interacting with another human being. And I don't know if that is a pros or a cons, but I think it will be something that will come sooner or later.
Yeah, and I think also that this point that came up also during your presentations and in this discussion, that it's not always about full autonomy, but like these levels towards autonomy. So maybe there still will be a driver in your autonomous bus in a rural area or minibus, because you want that person to talk to. So and that's an important part of the social aspect as well. So a couple more things from the chat. Some tips from Sweden. That there's a Drive Sweden have a project about co-designing, so that you can also all have a look at that. There's a question about data here as well. So how can cities prepare now? Oh no, it's just moved. How can cities prepare now to manage the undoubtedly overwhelming amount of data likely to be collected by connected autonomous vehicles? Should they already prioritize their data needs? Good examples from Amsterdam at how a CAV can scan the street for rubbish, which then triggers a truck to come and collect it. Data. What role the authorities in this?
One of my favorite topics. I think this is not only related to CCAM. I think this is something which cities have to face nowadays. There's a flood of data coming in, and different departments in city authorities. And I had the discussion with Sergio. I know EMT is drowning in data, but actually the key comes back, or the key questions come back to the impact. So what data do we really need? What are the key questions we need to ask? Because data is just an ingredient, actually. It only leads to context and other things to really knowledge, which you can maybe use for planning. So I think authorities will have to, or will need capacity building in terms of data collection, data analysis, using the right tools to really come to good decisions and policy making based on data.
Are they going to be software developers instead of transport engineers in traffic departments in the future?
No, I agree with Wolfgang.
Go on, Sergio.
I mean, the data is there, and what we really need to know is what to do with that data and what for. And for that, we need the skills and we need resources, and we are trying to work on that. And I agree with that vision. Yeah.
I'm going to go back now. Suzanne has asked a question here. It's the second time she's asked it, and it'd be good to sort of round up with this question, I think. So, does the panel support the statement that it is public policy that will determine the urban mobility impact of automated vehicles, as opposed to technology alone, possibly with the exception of safety? I don't want just a yes or no. You have to you have to give me a bit more meat in your answer. So who's going to take this first? There you go, Richard.
Well, in terms of the question, in terms of impact, I think the answer is yes. And from my perspective, it relates back to points about how do autonomous vehicles sit in relation to urban design and urban development. This does connect with the previous question about urban-rural connections as well. There are many examples of towns in Scotland which have no facilities within them, and they've been developed specifically as commuter towns where the expectation is that everybody in that town will drive everywhere. So if we had policies that actually said that that's not acceptable anymore, and that towns should actually have facilities within them to try to reduce congestion, then that is the kind of policy that needs to go hand in hand with technically driven policies to do with autonomous vehicles, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my own personal opinion, my own willingness, and is that yes, I think that would be determined by public policies. What I really don't know is if that will happen. But at least that is my personal willingness. Yeah.
What's going to?
I don't know. Sometimes, I mean, and this is also my personal opinion. I don't want to generate a polemics, but it depends on how strong is the car manufacturing industry in some places. At least in Spain, which are, as far as I know, the second car manufacturer in Europe. Every topic that touches any potential aspect of the car industry is very controversial, and there is kind of a general tendency to avoid these conflicts. So that could affect, I guess, but it might not be the same situation in other countries where there is no such car industry. I don't know.
From Greece, what's
well,
the word there?
We do not have any strong car manufacturing industry presence here, but I believe that it will be an iterative process. So it will start with public perception before any solid policy is formed, and then some initial policy measures will be drafted to regulate and essentially control the impacts. And then technology, as Suzanne place it as an opposition, will showcase, more of the capabilities and will reach better scoring and better, so to say, performance in certain key impacts, and then policy will adapt again, and so on until a relatively stable critical point is reached. That is how I view it. It's going to be very iterative and very. It will have some trial and error, unavoidable, in it.
Yeah, I can only
Wolfgang?
agree, and I just say to Suzanne's question, yes, I also think this is the way. And coming from Germany with a strong car manufacturing lobby, even in Germany, cities start to discuss urban vehicle access restriction and these kinds of things. So I think there's really an opportunity window and a change going on in this perspective. And I think if we really want to reach this Green Deal missions in the long term, there's no other way than having the cities in the driving seats and do this through public policies. And maybe just having a look at the results from the Coexist project for this early transition phase, where actually maybe even health scenarios could come up in the coexistence of automated and conventional vehicles. I think there are some decisions which need to be taken by the cities. For example, where are automated vehicles allowed to drive first, at which level, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there must be a guidance.
Great. Thank you. Well, we have 1 more minute of our session, so I will just round up then. And I think it's what is very clear. Oh, Richard, did you want to just say something? Go on. You get the last word before I then.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that yes, indeed, I think in regulation and design, which we talked about earlier, will help cities to determine the impact, but it's not about this technique. It's the subject this session, but it's about our goals, about the people, about and following maybe the services and the cities, and then the end services and the vehicles. I mean, and then the end you have this technical development. And yes, I think that the industry will determine minimal possible speed of this development, but the cities should determine the maximum development, and they probably will.
Thank you. And I would say, I mean, it's what's been very clear from all of this discussion is that planning, in a sort of very wide understanding of what planning means, is a very important part of ensuring that we get the outcomes and impacts that we want. So based on the city policy goals. And I think that's very much in Suzanne's last question there. And you've all answered it in the way that I'm sure she wanted you to answer it, that yes, of course, public policy is going to be what determines this, rather than just the vehicle technology, but they do go hand in hand. And since time is up, I think we could continue talking about this topic for a long time. I would like to round up and just say thank you very much for your excellent contributions. It was a really lovely discussion with all of you today. And thank you to the audience who for all of your questions, and continue the discussion. And the presentations will be shared. And also thank you to POLIS very much for hosting this session. So I'll close it there. Thank you very much, and goodbye.